Welcome back, folks, to the WP-Tonic show. In this episode, we're going to be talking about all things culture, how cultures affect startups, established business. I think it's the key to success in startups and more established business. We've got a true expert here. He's written a book called Spheres of Influence. He's got a ton of experience. He's worked for a number of Fortune 500 companies, Caterpillar, Whirlpool, Deutsche Bank, and the University of Texas. To say his experience is quite extensive would be a slight understatement. And that is Brad Englert. Brad, would you like to give us a quick 10-second, 20-second intro? And then when we go into the main part of the show, you can give the audience a more extensive introduction of yourself.
Yeah, I was with Accenture for 22 years, 10 years as a partner. And then I happily retired, and I got a call from my alma mater, the University of Texas at Austin, where I went to graduate school, and they needed some IT help. And so I volunteered to help an hour a week pro bono. That was in October. By March, I was half-time. By June, I was full-time. And 8 years later, I retired again.
That's a great story. And I've got my great co-host, Kurt. Kurt, would you like to introduce yourself to the new listeners and viewers?
Sure thing, Jonathan. My name is Kurt Von Annen. I own an agency called Mañana No Mas, and we work primarily with membership and learning websites and enterprise business.
Like I say, I think actually this is one of the most important subjects that we're going to discuss in 2025. I've really looked forward to this discussion. But before we go into the meat and potatoes of this great show, I've got a message from one of our major sponsors. We will be back in a few moments, folks.
Hey, running a business is tough. You shouldn't have to worry about your website too. With Kinsta's managed hosting for WordPress, you get lightning fast load times, enterprise-grade security, and 24/7 expert support from real humans. Switch to Kinsta and see site speeds improve by up to 200% with effortless migrations and powerful, easy-to-use dashboard. Join over 120,000 other businesses who also trust Kinsta. Get your first month for free at kinsta.com. That's KINSTA.com. Kinsta. Simply better hosting.
We're coming back, folks. I also want to point out we've got a great free online resource. It's basically some special offers from the sponsors of the show, plus a curated list aimed at the WordPress professional, best plugins, services, all aimed in cutting time and aggro for you. You can get all these free goodies by going over to wp-tonic.com/deals, wp-tonic.com/deals. You can get all the free goodies there, my beloved WordPress freelancers. What more could you ask for? Probably a lot more, but that's all you're going to get on that page. Let's go straight into it, Brad. I think business culture is really one of the main elements that will determine a startup, existing business will continue and prosper. But it's a very valueless term, business culture. Can, with all your experience in writing this book and all the interviews you've done, can you kind of pin down the animal a little bit more and give us some insight of what is company culture, business culture?
Well, I would start with what is the mission of the organization? What is the vision? Where do they see themselves in 5 years? What are their values? You know, do they value customer satisfaction, or do they value growing their people? And then strategy. And a dirty little secret is a lot of organizations do not have a strategy. So they're kind of rudderless.
Yeah, I agree with the second main point you were making. I think a lot of people think a large company has got a strategy, but it's just dealing with an endless stream of urgencies and just muddling through. But I also think there's a tremendous, and I'm not just picking on US business culture. I think this applies to the UK and generally. There seems to be a total mismatch on the public persona of companies and the reality. And it's probably always been there, but I think this is only my personal take on it. And this mismatch has only grown over the last 20, 40 years to such an extreme that nobody believes in it in the public statements of the majority of companies now. What's your response to that, Brad?
Well, I think a lot of companies have a short-term focus. They're only worried about the next quarter and may have their customers suffer as they try to meet their numbers. And so I think they lose sight of, what they're trying to achieve because they're being slaves to the master of the financial numbers.
Is there any I don't really see, obviously that will change in the end because it's not sustainable really, is it? But I only see that changing with a major crisis really, or is there a possibility of a more gradual change from that position?
I think if you have a leader who understands the need for strategy. I have this $3 billion organization. The new leader came in. He said he was going to create a strategy. Great. Guess what? 4 years went by and he didn't create a strategy. It was just ridiculous. So you're not going to ever make a change if you don't have the discipline to think ahead and, what is your differentiator? What will make you successful? And frankly, it's lazy.
Just before I throw it over to Kirk, would you also, this is my take on it, and I'm totally fine because you've got a lot more experience. I've just run over the 35 years, I've just run 3 very small companies and just made a reasonable living. There seem to be, and obviously I want to keep out the politics as much as possible, but economics and politics are one side of the same coin a lot of the time, in my opinion. We had the past 4 or 5 years, we've had a lot of what I call, and I'm a contradiction really, Brad. I've always been in the private sector, but I'm a Christian socialist. I make it quite clear what my political position is. And most Americans don't really understand what a Christian socialist is. They have no they think I'm a communist, right? Which makes me laugh actually, because you couldn't get much further from it. But there seemed to be from a lot of large companies, a lot of virtual signaling, and it seemed to be getting worse and worse and worse. Would you agree with that? And you got any insights what was driving this virtual signaling?
Well, some companies are really good at it, and they do focus on the culture they're trying to create. And the companies I worked with, I mean, many of them, they knew what they were trying to achieve and they were very clear about it. And, one company almost had a feeling of a family. They really treated their employees like, not like children, but, they really cared about their employees.
You're
And it
talking
really,
about a philosophy like a famous company that had that kind of attitude was Cadbury, the chocolate manufacturer conglomerate in the UK. They were a Quaker-based family. They sold the company, I think, to Nestle about 20 years ago, but they were notorious for that kind of philosophy. Would that be a good example of what you're trying to point out?
Absolutely. And when I joined Accenture, I looked at all the big consulting firms, and they had a culture that focused on mentoring and coaching. It emphasized training. It had an ethical point of view, meaning think straight, talk straight, customer focus all the way. And that's why I joined the firm. You know, it was really, if you're looking for a place to work, I would look at the culture and see if that's a good fit. I had another competing firm, and I talked to them. They would only hire people with master's degrees, but they didn't really train their people. And, you know, just that seemed pretty self-defeating. When I joined the firm, there were 40,000 consultants globally. Accenture now has 700,000 people working for them.
My God. Right, over to you, Kurt.
Well, Brad, I kind of want to drive you back to the original start of your answer when Jonathan asked you about, any company culture. One of the first things you had mentioned was, having company values and all those things. And kind of echoing Jonathan a little bit, there's definitely a, do as I say, not as I do mentality in the business world. And so if you're looking to get into one of these companies or build your own company, what is your advice then for that, not falling into that trap? Like a lot of companies have a list of values, or they have a mission statement, or they have a, some kind of published strategy that they say they're working on. But when you get into those small rooms, when the VPs and the presidents and the directors all get in that little room and have a discussion, that room is devoid of any of the company values and strategies, and it's that putting out fires kind of thing. How do you identify that in a company, and then know to run away? How do you see those red flags before you know?
Well, when I joined the university, Central IT, the culture of Central IT was fire drills and rewarding heroics. And that's opposite of my worldview, which is proactive customer service. And so I had to change the culture. So how did I do that? First, I talked to a number of constituents on campus and said, what do you want from the central organization? They wanted truthfulness, consistency. They wanted transparency. They wanted to participate in decision making. And that became our values. And everyone who joined the organization had to go to a mandatory orientation. And some people would slip away and try to, they were too busy. Well, I'd find them and get them into the next orientation the next month, because I wanted them to meet the management team, and I wanted them to hear about the values. And I wanted to say that if you have an idea that's going to help our customers, tell us. If you're new to the organization, do that. Now, I had to replace 3 out of 7 directors who could not make the transition to a proactive, customer-focused culture, and they just couldn't do it. And so I was able to replace them with people who did have that point of view. Also, once a week, I would write a blog, just a short couple hundred word blog. And I'd talk about the values. I'd talk about my expectations, which is don't check your email 24/7. If you have a school play, go to the school play. If you have a doctor's appointment, go to the doctor's appointment. If you're sick, stay home, because we have 330 people to back you up. Now, early in my career, I would rely on my management team to convey those messages. And guess what? It didn't happen.
No.
Some managers wanted to keep the information for power. Others, it didn't even dawn on them that they should tell their people. And so I did not want the grapevine to rule. And over time, it took 9 months to a year, we slowly turned the ship to be more proactive, more customer oriented. And a lot of that was getting out of our offices and meeting with our customers. So I had a woman who worked for me, and she read the manuscript, said, "You left out my story." I said, "What story was that?" They said, "When you demanded I go meet with someone who hated us." And I said, "Well, I want them in the tent, not outside the tent throwing rocks at us."
Yeah.
And sure enough, after about 9 or 10 months, the person who, quote, hated us due to prior bad behavior, which we apologized for, slowly saw us get it more consistent, better service, more proactive. And after 10, 11 months, she became an advocate for us. And her boss, who also hated us because of bad behavior, which I apologize for, he became an advocate. So it's a multimodal approach where, we all had our network of peers and influencers that we'd go meet with and our customers and it was like a nervous system. You could hear the feedback. It was a two-way communication. Also, we had quarterly meetings where we get together in person and hybrid, where we'd bring customers in and share stories. But it was really hard to change a culture where people were being rewarded for heroics and fire drilling when, that's opposite of what our customers wanted. But we were able to do it.
Well, and that's the perfect segue into our second question, and that is those tendencies for leadership. Some people say everything hinges on, leadership, right? Where do you think those fundamental differences come in someone like you, or the 7 people or the 4 people you kept versus the 3 you let go, right? The firemen versus the proactive people. Do you think that's something that's driven from family experience and upbringing, or do you think that's something that, you've had to unnaturally maybe convert your natural ways into being a proactive person?
Well, I'm a big believer in Stephen Covey and the 7 habits, and being proactive, and that I was taught that from day one at the firm. So and then really caring about your customers. I found there are 3 principles that help every business relationship. One is ask what their goals and aspirations are. You can do that with your boss. You can do that with your customer. You can do that with vendors. Second, set and manage expectations. I was really bad at that early in my career. I got much better later in my career. And third, genuinely care about their success. So when I got to the university, I met with this professor. He'd been there 40 years, kind of a crusty dude who was an electrical engineer. I'd worked with him 15 years prior on a statewide network design, which was successful. And I said, "Give me some advice." He goes, "Get out of the office and tell people you give a damn." And that was the best advice ever.
Wow. Jonathan, over to you.
Yeah, I'm listening to this, Brad, and I agree with you that this is my natural style. It's kind of like looking at great military leaders. I'm influenced, like Eisenhower, Grant, British great military leaders, but there's another side to this. There's people that are listening to this just think this is nonsense. We're talking basically shit, basically, and they are more It's around the management style that was promoted by Steve Jobs. And bless his heart, I think he had great strengths. But after I've listened to the bio that was written by Walter Atkinson about 3 times. I've listened to it, and it's I don't know if you've read the bio or listened to it, but it's a great document of a time and place of the Bay Area and Silicon Valley and Steve being an outsider, but it's clear to me that he was a narcissist and a bit of a psychopath as well. First of all, would you agree with that about the bio and about Walter's ability to kind of combine the culture of the area with Steve's oddness? He being adopted, being always feeling that he was an outsider, being part of the culture, the opposite culture, but also very, you just used people left, right, and centre. A strange concoction. Yeah, he could be very compassionate, but icy cold as well. A strange concoction and a strange man. But he had this principle where he only wanted A players, and everybody else that was an A player was a bimbo. That should be used and dismissed as quickly as possible. What's your view? I'll put a lot of stuff to you, but hopefully you can see why this interests me, because I think this book and around Steve Jobs, and I think there's a lot of people in the tech industry that really hold him up as the managerial example, don't they?
Well, I think there's a founder culture, and the founder culture, founders tend to be high risk. They're willing to take the leap. They tend to be wildly creative. They tend to be personality oriented. And if you have a small company of 50 people, the founder has relationships with all those people. When you try to scale that, though, I think that's when it breaks down, because if you're trying to scale your company, you can have high risk, lots of fluctuating ideas. And that's why a lot of mid-sized companies bring in professional management to actually take over for the founder. And they usually kick the founder up to the board or something like that. So I think the things that make a founder successful are not necessarily what makes a company successful when it's trying to scale.
Yeah, I see. Can I be truthful? You're just giving me a very classical answer. But aren't we seeing, in the end, he was running an enormous company, and I think, let's go for it. Elon Musk, one of the biggest entrepreneurs in the US that runs 3 tremendously large companies. They're not startups; they're major companies. And yet, I think he adopts Steve Jobs on steroids. The attitude that if you're a bimbo, you're out. And other silicon startup ideology at its extreme. How do you respond, Brad?
Well, he's certainly been successful, but there's also been some erratic results that have come out. So I think, if you have enough money, you can paper over anything.
Yeah, because in some ways, when more information, he was always on my radar, but I didn't really know much about him. And when he became more of a public figure, I delved into it and I saw extreme echoes to Henry Ford. And Henry Ford's always been, I've been always aware of the good side of Henry Ford, which is cannot be diminished. But there was a real ugly side to Henry Ford as well, a very, very ugly side, which really destroyed his position as being, should be seen as one of the top industrialists of the USA, but it's totally been discredited by his dark side. So to get back to it, do you really, because I think all companies, their culture always from the start, and it echoes on to a long time, is based on family dynamics, really, because they repeat the culture that they were brought up in their family and in the period they were brought up in. Do you think I'm on the right road there?
Sure. I think, the way they treat people, you learn that from your family. And that can be good and that can be bad. All
right. We're going to go for I've given Brad some difficult questions here. He's dealt with me very suavely. He's a true expert. We're going to go for our middle break, folks, and we'll be back. We will be delving more into the realities of culture, startups, and big business in the US in the second half.
Tired of hosting providers that can't handle high traffic loads? Conversio is here to help. Our platform can handle any amount of traffic, all without slowing down or crashing. With immediate Slack support, performance optimization, and a team that thrives on resolving technical challenges, your e-commerce business is in safe hands. Learn more about Conversio at conversio.com.
This podcast episode is brought to you by Lifter LMS, the leading learning management system solution for WordPress. If you or your client are creating any kind of online course, training-based membership website, or any type of e-learning project, Lifter LMS is the most secure, stable, well-supported solution on the market. Go to lifterlms.com and save 20% at checkout with coupon code podcast20. That's podcast20. Enjoy the rest of your show.
Coming back, we've had a great discussion. We've discussed Steve Jobs, American culture when it comes to companies. Brad's dealt with me with ease. He's just dealt with me with ease. But before we go into the second half, just want to point out, now, have you got a load of small clients that you've built out their website and then now they want you to support their websites 24/7, for you to be on the phone 24/7, to be available weekends, whenever they want to call you or text you, and they don't want to spend any money with you either. Have you been there, my beloved WordPress freelancers? Well, I've not a great situation to be in, being available to small project clients 24/7. I've got an answer here. You can go over to WP-Tonic/partners, and we've got a fabulous answer. You can hand them over to WP-Tonic and we will deal with them. And every year you will get a check, a credit for 40%, and none of the aggro. What more could you ask for, my beloved WordPress tribe? Go and find more. Go over to wp-tonic.com/partners and let's chat about us getting rid of your problem clients. Over to you, Kirk.
Well, I get to switch gears a little bit with you, Brad, which is kind of fun. Jonathan and I, besides being completely interested in company culture and all those things, we're also in the tech space, and we end up discussing artificial intelligence quite often, the term vibe coding and different AI tools and things like that. But we're kind of curious, where do you see artificial intelligence affecting corporations from a culture perspective? Do you think it's going to like rip humanity out of the corporate circle, or do you think it's going to cause us to run more fervently towards humanity as AI gets more and more prevalent?
That's an interesting question. I think AI is going to affect the entry level people in organizations, and I kind of worry about the hollowing out of those skills. And just take the legal profession, for example. Yet entry level attorney is going to be doing research, going through files. Well, now AI will do that, so you don't need them working on that anymore. And the question is, well, how do you train them to be a seasoned attorney down the road? And there's a really good book which I'm reading, Welcome to AI. They looked at 160 million jobs, and the ones that will be affected the most: legal, business and financial operations. And they're thinking half those jobs going away.
Yeah.
By industry: finance, education, scientific and technical services. So it's coming. To me, it's very similar to the move from mainframe computing to client server to cloud computing. To me, it's that fundamental change.
Yeah. Well, you bring up an interesting point, especially with your referral to Stephen Covey's book, right? Because it isn't one of his 7 effective habits, replacing yourself, right? Getting ready to replace yourself.
That's right.
If we don't have a mechanism to warm the bench, if we erase that mechanism to have qualified people on standby, we really limit the ability of leadership to look at who's available and who's promotable and who's trainable, huh?
Yeah. And you can't trust all the results. So you still need a human to look at the output and say, yeah, that's correct. And I don't think we're there yet, but you don't need that human intervention.
Yeah. Jonathan?
Yeah, sure. So where would you say we are when we look, you've consulted, you've been in the front lines of some of the largest companies in America. Where would you say let's take the Fortune 500 companies of this country, of this continent. I'm a joint citizen. I've lived here for about 18 years. And the vastness of this country, I come from a very small country, UK, very small. Hasn't really accepted, really, in my opinion, that it's a small country. Especially the elite of the country find it very difficult to accept the realities of Britain. But when I come to this continent, the vastness of this country still overwhelms me. But where are we when we look at the Fortune 500 companies in general? Obviously, this is a ridiculous question because we're talking about enormous organizations. But broadly, where do you think where culture is when you look at some of the top companies in the US at the present moment?
Well, I think most companies I worked with were top of the game. And that was the beauty of working for Accenture, because we do work with most of the Fortune 500 companies. And success breeds success. 80 to 90% of our customers are repeat customers. So we don't work with everybody. And even when I was running central IT, I didn't have to serve everybody if they were a pain in the, you know what? And so not all customers are created equal. And I think, we gravitated to companies that did have their act together and vice versa. And the repeat customers come because you've been successful together. And that can last over years and decades. So I think you have to be strategic and intentional about who you're working with. You don't have to work with an unethical firm. I was on the other side of the desk, and I had strategic vendor partners. What do I mean by that? The ones I'm spending the most money with. So tens of millions of dollars a year. And I had one vendor who was not ethical. And I caught them in more than one compromised situation where I had to go up their management chain, fire the account rep because they were unethical. But, at the end of the day, I had to drop that company because their culture was so toxic.
And
there was no saving it.
What do you think? Obviously, these are very broad questions. I'm asking you some very difficult questions, but by watching the other interviews, I got the impression you were up for it. What are some of the main drivers for a company, a large company, to become totally unethical? Is it just making a load of money?
Yeah, they were driven by the financial numbers. They didn't care at all about our success. And in fact, they tried to bill me for work that they hadn't even started yet. Now, they had a tracking tool that showed they hadn't started yet they still tried to bill me for work. And it's like, what are you people doing? Well, they were trying to meet numbers at the end of the quarter. I had the sales rep try to get one of my directors to sign off on a purchase that we didn't even approve yet. And it turned out to be the last day of his quarter. And that's the one I got fired. Then they came up with this technique. They sent me a letter saying, we want to audit all your software that you use from us. And it's like, well, that's expensive and we don't use that much. So I looked at my contract and there's no audit clause. So I said, no, I'm not going to do it. And the sales guy goes, well, it's not me. It's compliance in California. It's not me. So I basically told him no. Well, a call goes to corporate to a lawyer, but it was misrouted, didn't go to the lawyer, it went to the CFO, and his assistant got chewed out by someone from this company about me not following, playing ball with them. And well, I run the phone system. So I looked up the number and guess who it was? It was the sales guy. I mean, that was the final straw.
Being an outsider, being British, because I came here when I was 42, so I had a reasonably successful in the business in the UK. It was outside of tech, but it was only very small, but it was reasonably successful. So I always will see myself as British because I was brought up. So I'm a kind of hybrid. I see myself, when I go back to the UK, my family think I'm very American. So looking at it, these are very broad statements, but in general, I find most Americans to be very hardworking, a little bit intense, but generally hardworking and affable. Just really interested in their families, doing a bit better and looking after their children. If they have children, or that's their cup of tea. But there seems to be also a drifter class that we're WP-Tonic's in the e-learning business. And there's a whole drifter class in the e-learning membership sector. But there's a general drifter class in the business, in business generally. And they seem to be promoted and looked up. I'm not saying it's in the UK as well. There's a lot of class hypocrisy in the UK. It's dripping with it. But there seems to be a whole sector in the business culture in the US that seem to promote and really promote and highlight and celebrate a whole drifter class. I've always found this fascinating. Would you agree with that? And when you got any insight where that comes from?
I don't. In my experience, I haven't witnessed that. I've seen people promoted who shouldn't be promoted, whether they're drifters or not. They might not have the skills. One thing that the firm did a really good job with is giving us field promotions. So when I was a senior consultant, they'd give me a field promotion as to be a manager, so I could run a little project and develop my managerial skills. When I became a senior manager, they had me serve as an associate partner level. So I managed a very large project on my own. And then when I was they preparing me for partner, they put me in a partner role. And that the field promotions kind of helped prevent the Peter principle, because you had to prove that you could work at that next level. But it was kind of risk-free because you weren't a manager, you were a senior consultant. And so it was, they were really good at helping you develop the skills. So when you got to that level, you didn't have imposter syndrome because you've already demonstrated you could be successful at that level. And I'm sure a lot of firms don't do that.
All right, over to you, Kurt.
I'm not sure where to go, to be honest with you, Jonathan. We could, I was going to ask, if there were any AI tools or anything specific in your like little quiver of tools that you use to be more efficient in your dealings now.
I fully intend to, but I'm professionally paranoid, and I don't trust the companies to suck all the data out of my computer.
Yeah.
And so I want to wait till it's a little either baked into a product like, Gmail or Teams. If it's baked in, I'll feel a lot safer with it. But it's a little bit of a wild, wild west right now.
Well, if you use any Microsoft products, good luck trying to escape the Copilot, man. They are forcing that into every
Yes.
nook and cranny of my computer. It is crazy.
I know. And I had this AI tool to take notes in meetings. I can't get rid of the damn thing. I cannot. You go to applications, it's not there. It's like, come on. How do I get rid of you?
It reminds me of when we were kids and we would watch Looney Tunes, and there was the one with the two dogs, and the one dog was like big and kind of muscular and laid back, and the other little dog was going, "What do you want to do now? What do you want to do now? What do you want to do now?" That's the way I feel AI is attacking my work style life right now.
Yeah.
Jonathan, I'll jump into the last one if that's okay.
I've got another question.
Oh, shoot. Go for it.
So in the first half, you seem to indicate, or the impression I got, that some of when you were brought in to the University of Texas and other companies that you consulted and worked with, that one of the factors was a lack of trust and a lack of communication. And you really tried to work on the communication element and actually have building up credibility. So with all your years of consulting, were there other patterns that you observed that regularly occurred around why companies and their cultures were failing? Were there consistent patterns that you observed?
Well, I'll give you an example of a mission critical system for us. And if you're into e-learning, you know about this, a learning management system. So
we know nothing about those.
So 54,000 students, 4,000 faculty, 21,000 staff. To make that change was a big deal. Well, my incumbent vendor had been in place for 10, 15 years, and they just figured the switching costs would be too great for us. So they just did not care about us at all. And the company would show up in the office once a year to get their maintenance check, which was always 10% more than the prior year. I actually hired them to do an upgrade with Pro Things that had worked for 5 years. And so, working with the vice provost in charge of curriculum, we went to the marketplace and evaluated 15 learning management systems. And we found a modern, cloud-based learning management system that actually used standards. My incumbent vendor had no standards. In fact, we could not plug email in securely, which is ridiculous. But they just didn't care. So the faculty and students picked this new product. It took us 2 years to do that transition. The senior VP for sales of that new company would call me once a month like clockwork and ask how it was going. He really cared about us because he knew if he could get this to work for our huge university, he could sell to all the other large Research One universities. This was 10 years ago. Guess what? He sold it to all those other R1 research universities. And it was such a wonderful day when I was able to fire the incumbent vendor who didn't even hear the bullet coming. I mean, they were so clueless. And I think it's just that lack of caring and, just worried about the money is what made them fail versus the company that actually changed their product to help us be successful, which of course helped them be successful down the road.
I think that's fantastic. Just a quick follow-through question. Obviously, we're both, Kirk and myself, are big into WordPress and big into open source software. We do have some larger clients. We've got a very diverse spread of different types of clientele, Brad. Mm-hmm. Where do you think open source is at the present moment? Do you think it's still growing, larger companies are still interested in the cost savings and not being locked in to a vendor like your fantastic example? Or are they still, to some extent, a little bit wary and a bit dismissive of open source?
I think in an enterprise like the university, which is a $3 billion a year enterprise, all our products need to be industrial strength. They have to be secure. They have to be accessible for people with vision impairment and hearing impairment. Yeah, there are criteria that we have to meet, and sometimes that's hard with open source. Now, we have vendors who take open source and put those industrial strength wrappers around it, and we certainly have several instances of that being very successful. But we have secure privacy requirements that at a federal level that we have to adhere to. And if I don't get those terms and conditions into the agreements, I'm at risk. So there's a pretty high bar for a large organization.
Yeah, I think I'll throw the last question over to Kurt.
Well, Brad, we like to ask folks kind of a fun one. If you had an H.G. Wells time machine or your own TARDIS like Doctor Who, you could go back in time to when your career first started. What advice would you have that you would give yourself?
Yes, Brad, you can't say you want to tell yourself you shouldn't have come on this podcast.
Oh, it's fun. I enjoy the podcast because everyone has a different point of view, and I learn something every time. So
there you go. Oh, sorry, I interrupted you, Brad. Can you answer Kurt's question?
Oh, it froze on me, so I didn't hear the question.
Oh, well, that makes me lousy.
It's technology.
If you had your own time machine, like a TARDIS or an H.G. Wells example, you could go back in time to the beginning of your career. What advice would you give yourself?
Do a much better job at setting and managing expectations. So I did a really crappy job, which led me to work too hard and too long and with not much direction. So one time I get this call from a partner, and she was this type A personality. Brad, I need a white paper. And I literally, because I just read a book on managing expectations, I literally said, whoa. I didn't say no, because that would set her off. I said, whoa, when do you need this white paper? Oh, let me check my calendar. I meet with the client in 2 weeks. Well, it sounded urgent, How many pages do you want this white paper to be? Oh, 3 pages. I was thinking 10. Do you have an example of a white paper? Yeah, I talked to David. I did one on XYZ Corp 5 years ago. Well, guess what? I went home and had dinner with my wife. Before I learned to say, whoa, I would stay up all night, write a 10-page paper, deliver it the next day, and get yelled at.
Yeah.
So just give some mental space and time.
I think that's so insightful, Brad. You really got to understand the expectations of all these different, because there's one particular client we're dealing with at the present moment, and they sound very similar to the person you just talked about. But you really got to find out, because you can get into a real pickle, a real argument, and sometimes you really got to put your foot down. But
yeah,
if you can end up arguing all the time and the actual thing they're looking for is rather minor, but I think it's tricky, isn't it? Because if you keep giving in to things, it can grow and grow and grow, isn't it? So there's no black and white, is there? You just
after I read that book and learned to say whoa, I never missed a vacation. I never missed training. I went to school plays. I went to the doctor. You just have to use your words. Your boss isn't a mind reader.
Right, Brad. It's been a great discussion. What's the best way for people to find out more about you and your thoughts and your insights, Brad?
I can send you a link to my website that gives your listeners a free sample of the book, also how to buy the book, and third, how to schedule time on my calendar.
I think I've got it. Is it Brad, your first and second name.com?
Well, that's my website, but this will be a customized link.
Oh, great.
That'd
be fantastic. Yeah, we make sure that's in all the show notes, Brad.
It's for your listeners.
Thank you so much. And if you want to support the show, folks, why don't you go over to the WP-Tonic YouTube channel? It's growing rapidly. I'm getting close to 10,000 subscribers. Got a load of extra content on there that will interest you, folks. Subscribe to the channel. It really shows you're supporting the tribe, folks. We will be back next week with another great discussion like this one. We'll see you soon. Bye.